Good afternoon, my dear ones. I'm Eleanor Mae Johnson, but everyone here in Savannah, Georgia, calls me Mama Ellie. I'm 72 years blessed, praise the Lord. I've spent more than 40 years in this beautiful coastal town, watching the tides come in and the Spanish moss dance in the oak trees. Life here is simple, full of salt air and hidden seashells. Every morning before sunrise, I rise and make my coffee, black with a touch of cream, just the way my grandchildren love it when they come to stay. My house is small, but it's warm, my refuge. I keep my treasures not in fancy vaults, but in ordinary boxes. Wooden cigar boxes, old metal tins, a few velvet jewelry boxes, all stacked in the corner shelf my son built for me. Inside each box is a memory, a photograph, a letter, a trinket, pieces of a story. I record these stories because my granddaughter Grace told me once, "Mama Ellie, people need to hear your truth." At first I was shy. Yes, an old woman on the internet, it felt strange. But now when I speak, it's like sitting across a kitchen table with you, telling you things I should have spoken long ago. So if you like my way of talking, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss any of this heart. Because what I want to tell you today is hard, but it's true. It's a story about lies that cut deep, about a little girl who believed she was unlovable, and the truth that finally set her free. I was born in a tiny town called Cedar Cove, down on the Georgia-Florida line, where the nights are humid, the cicadas sing, and the swamp lights glow. My father, Richard Johnson, worked with his hands, cutting timber, loading logs onto trucks. He was a man of few smiles, broad shoulders, and strong arms, but a heart that I would come to know wore many masks. My mother, Evelyn, was light in the room. Soft-spoken, always humming hymns, with a laugh like gentle rain on the tin roof. She baked cornbread and fried okra, and she would tell me stories about Aunt Rosalie, about the moon reflecting on the marsh, about animals and faith and magic in small things. I was the youngest of two older brothers, Michael and Joseph. Mama said I was her gift, her peace, because after me she couldn't have more children. On Sunday afternoons, we would all sit at the porch swing after church. Brothers talking quietly, Mama peeling peaches, Daddy sitting late, looking off toward the horizon. I believed in Mama's love with every cell in my body. She tucked me in at night, pressed her cheek to my forehead, whispered, "Eleanor Mae, your mother loves you like the river loves its banks. If it runs away for a time, it always returns." Everything was peaceful, until 1965, when Mama grew thin, pale, coughing at night. At first, we thought it was just a cold. But the cough got worse. I remember one night, I saw her cover her mouth with a cloth, and when she thought I wasn't looking I saw the red stains. I asked her once, "Mama, are you going to hurt?" She smiled at me, faint, tremulous, and said, "Child, I hurt sometimes, but I'm fine. Don't you worry." That lie, born of love, was the first of many that would twist my world. Daddy began staying at the sawmill longer, coming home smelling of sawdust, whiskey, and guilt. Mama's baking faded. Her laughter quieted. One Sunday after church, I saw two neighbors speak in hushed voices, glancing toward our door. "Mrs. Beatrice," she touched my arm and said, "Your mama doesn't have much time, child." I didn't understand, but I felt that something heavy was pressing against the air. Daddy said nothing. He just stared at the ground and clasped his hands around his coffee cup as if it might slip away. Mama, though, still made me believe she was there. She still tucked me in, still stroked my hair, still pressed blessings into my heart as I slept. Then one evening it happened. Daddy came home later than usual. I had already eaten, already bathed, ready for bed. He knocked on my door. When I opened it, I thought he would ask me about school or whether I'd done my reading. But his eyes were red, his breath thick. He didn't speak kindly. He said, "Eleanor Mae, your mother never truly loved you. If she did, she'd have stayed. She'd have fought." His words slammed into me like thunder in a summer storm. I remember grabbing at his coat, asking him to tell me it wasn't true. He pushed me away and said, "She left the house, left us. She wasn't strong enough." And from that moment, a seed of doubt took root in my heart. Mama passed away soon after. Tuberculosis, the doctor said, though we didn't have many doctors in Cedar Cove. I carried a ragged quilt she made, her soft hands, everything she ever said to me when she thought I wasn't listening. But after she was gone, Daddy's words became a constant echo. She never loved you, she never loved you. At school, at church, in my dreams. Miss Clara, my teacher, used to call me aside after class. "Ellie, your eyes tell a story," she said. I wanted to tell her what I felt, to show her the scraps of Mama's apron I kept hidden under my bed, to read the letters she left. But I was afraid. I believed Daddy's story more than I believed the truths that flickered under my skin. And little by little I stopped asking. I stopped hoping. At night, I became silent. I tiptoed through the house when Daddy was angry. I skipped lunches sometimes so I wouldn't have to be there when he came home. My brothers, older than I, were distant and busy. They had their own lives, their own ways of dealing with grief. I had no one to talk to, no one who asked hard questions, no one who believed. Even Mrs. Beatrice, bless her heart, though she offered comfort, said, "Let time heal." But time only deepened the wound when there was no truth to soothe it. Then, when I was 12, I found something Mama had hidden, a small leather journal, clasped shut, tucked under floorboards by the fireplace. It had no name on the cover, just worn leather and an aroma of lilac and mothballs. One night, after Daddy went to sleep, I crept in the dark, used a hairpin to pry the floorboard a little, and retrieved that journal. I traced my fingers over Mama's handwriting, trembling. Inside were poems and scraps of paper, prayers and promises. For Eleanor Mae, whoever reads this, know that I never stopped loving you. I kept every letter you drew, every laugh you shared, every tear you shed. I wished with everything I had to stay. But I was weak, sick, and I feared what Daddy would do if I stayed. If I leave, that doesn't mean I didn't love you. One day I hope you see truth brighter than his lies. Tears streamed as I read, as if my body had held them all these years. Mama's words were threads stitching together what Daddy's voice had torn. In that moment, the darkness inside me shifted. The lie no longer had all the power. That night, I clasped the journal to my chest and made a promise. I would carry Mama's truth with me, even when the wind tried to blow it away. But the key to Mama's promise was inside my father's study, a room always locked, always smelling of old leather and cedar. I asked first politely if I could see the study. He said no. Then I watched him walk out with a key hanging from his belt, and I guessed there was something inside those drawers, something hidden. One day, when he returned from the mill drunk, I crept in through the back porch. My heart pounding, I used one of Daddy's missing keys that Mama once told me she copied and hid, just in case. I entered the study. The room smelled of dust and regret. There was a locked safe in the corner. I approached it, trembling, and I saw what was inside. A yellow envelope, a faded photograph of Mama smiling, her arms around me, her eyes bright and something wrapped in soft fabric. I know what you might think. Maybe it was only money. But that envelope held far more. Inside, Mama had tucked a letter, not just poems, but proof. Proof that she had saved money, had bought fabric to sew dresses for me, had kept all Mama's seeds of hope. The fabric was soft cotton she had asked me to pick out when I was little. The photograph one she had mailed to relatives far away before she got sick. The letter said that even though she had to leave, to go to a sanatorium far from Cedar Cove, her heart had never left me. She wrote that she wrote this letter in secret, so Daddy would not tear it up, because she believed in me and dreamed of a day I would know I was loved. That discovery burned through the darkness I'd lived in. I held that letter under my pillow all night, reading and rereading until the dawnlight came in. I wept, but not because I was sad, because I realized I was not alone. My dear ones, if you ever doubt that someone you love cared for you deeply, know that sometimes love is hidden, silenced, compromised, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. The days after I found Mama's letter were different, though everything looked the same. My brothers still left early for work. The church bells still rang on Sundays. My father still came home with whiskey on his breath. But something in me had changed. The flame Mama lit in my heart with her words. It burned quiet but steady. I kept the letter folded neatly under the lining of an old shoebox I used for my sewing scraps. I carried the photograph tucked between the pages of my schoolbooks. And the little bundle of fabric? I stitched it into the inside hem of my Sunday dress. That way, she was with me always, even when no one could see. Still, the fear hadn't left me. Not entirely. That letter was like a key to freedom, but the lock was still real. My father, his anger, his lies. I began to observe him more closely, trying to understand his habits. He kept the safe locked now. I'd only gotten in that one time because he'd forgotten to lock it after drinking too much. He started spending more time in his study, like he knew something had shifted. Some days he would look at me with those sharp eyes and ask, "What you always thinking about, girl?" I'd shrug. "Just school," I'd say. But inside, my mind was racing. I knew I couldn't stay. The house was growing colder, not just from the wind off the marshes, but from what hung in the air. My father's drinking worsened. The silences stretched longer. The nights felt more dangerous. He began to mutter to himself, say things like, "She took everything from me," and I knew he didn't mean just Mama. He was talking about me now, too. One Saturday, I gathered my courage and went to see Miss Clara, my teacher. She was the only adult who had ever really looked me in the eye and seen something more than just a quiet girl with hollow cheeks. "I need to ask you something, ma'am," I whispered after class. She sat down beside me and nodded, her face soft. "You can ask me anything, Ellie." If someone had to leave home, if someone had to go somewhere else, far away, could they do it? I asked. She studied me. "Is someone hurting you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She didn't push. "Do you have family somewhere?" "I think so. Maybe." Mama had cousins near Macon. She sighed. "Ellie, if you ever need to go, really need to, you let me know. I'll help." I nodded, heart pounding. I didn't know if I'd ever ask for that help, but just knowing someone had said those words, it felt like a door had opened somewhere. That night, I went home and stared out the window at the marsh. The reeds swayed like dancers. The moon reflected on the black water. And I made a plan. I started gathering little things. My Sunday dress with the fabric stitched inside, a pair of shoes with soles worn down but still strong, a biscuit tin where I stashed coins I found around the house. I packed the shoebox with Mama's letter inside. Every day, I counted the coins, whispering numbers under my breath like they were sacred. One morning, I found my father passed out in the living room, whiskey bottle beside him, snoring loud enough to rattle the floorboards. I slipped into his study again. The safe was locked tight, but I didn't need it anymore. I had what mattered. That same afternoon, I saw Miss Clara walking home and followed at a distance. When we were away from school, I ran up behind her and said, "I'm ready." She turned, startled, and I saw her eyes soften when she saw my face. She didn't ask why. She just said, "Tomorrow. Early. Before sunrise. Meet me by the post office." I nodded and ran home, heart thudding so hard I thought it might knock me over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I watched the ceiling, listened for any sound of my father stirring. Every creak in the house made me flinch. I had placed my shoebox under the floorboard again, just in case. But somehow, he must have noticed something. Around midnight, the door to my room creaked open. I froze. His silhouette stood in the doorway. I smelled the sour mix of alcohol and cigarette smoke. My hands clutched the blanket. "You think I don't see you hiding things?" he growled. I didn't answer. He stepped inside, the floor groaning under his boots. "You're just like your mama. Always sneaking. Always lying." "I'm not lying," I whispered. "She left you," he said. "Don't you get it? She left because she didn't want you. She was weak. And now you're weak too." I sat up. "That's not true." His voice dropped. "What did you say?" "She loved me. She wrote me letters. She saved money. She was trying to protect me." He stared at me like I'd spoken in a language he didn't understand. Then his face twisted into something cruel. You went in the study. I didn't move. You stole from me. No, I said, shaking. I took what she left for me. He stepped forward fast, and I thought he might strike me, but then, he stopped. His chest heaved. He looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw fear in his eyes. Fear that I had found the truth. That I didn't believe him anymore. He turned and walked out, slamming the door. I sat in the dark, heart racing. I knew then I couldn't wait. I had to leave now. I shoved the shoebox in my satchel, pulled on my dress, and stuffed the biscuit tin in my coat. The house was silent except for the sound of the wind brushing against the walls. I tiptoed down the stairs, avoiding the creaky spots. My hands shook as I opened the back door. The marsh was quiet. The moon lit the path. I ran barefoot to the edge of town, shoes in hand. My legs ached. My lungs burned. But I didn't stop. Miss Clara was there, just like she said. Her car, an old Ford, rumbled quietly by the post office. You came, she said, eyes wide with both relief and fear. I nodded, breathless. She opened the passenger door. Get in, child. As we pulled away from Cedar Cove, I looked back once. The trees swayed. The church steeple peeked above the pines. The house was hidden behind me. I didn't cry. Not then. Miss Clara drove in silence for a long time. Then she said, You're safe now. And for the first time in my life, I believed that might be true. Miss Clara dropped me off just before dawn in a neighborhood on the edge of Macon. The houses were older, their porches wide and wooden, and the scent of magnolia trees hung in the heavy morning air. I clutched my satchel to my chest like a shield. She handed me a slip of paper. Her name's Margaret Hill. Your mama's cousin. Lives right down this street. Number 108. You sure you'll be all right? I nodded, though my hands trembled. Thank you, I whispered. She squeezed my shoulder gently. You're brave, Ellie. Braver than most. And with that, she drove away. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the house. It was painted pale yellow, with green shutters and a cracked stone walkway. A rocking chair sat empty on the porch. I walked up slowly, each step heavy with fear and hope. I knocked once. Then again. A woman answered. She was in her 50s, grey streaks in her curls, apron tied around her waist. Her eyes were wide, cautious. Yes. Are you Margaret Hill? I am. My name is Eleanor Mae Johnson. I'm Evelyn's daughter. From Cedar Cove. I saw her hand go to her mouth. Her eyes filled with something that looked like memory. Evelyn. Oh my lord, she murmured. You look just like her. She pulled me inside, no questions. Sat me at her kitchen table. Poured me sweet tea, though it was barely 6 a.m. She didn't press for answers. Not yet. She just let me sit, breathe, be. Later, I told her pieces of what had happened. Not all. I couldn't speak of the worst things, not yet. But I told her about Mama's death. About the letter. About my father's words. And her face grew tighter with every sentence. I knew your mother was in pain, she said softly. She wrote once, right after she got sick. Said she was afraid of what Richard was becoming. Said she couldn't tell anyone else, that he watched her like a hawk. But she begged me to pray for you. That's the last I ever heard. We sat in silence, letting the past settle between us. She let me stay. Made up a bed in her sewing room, gave me a place to rest. I was 13, alone in a new city, but for the first time in a long while, I felt something like safety. Margaret didn't treat me like a burden. She didn't ask why I hadn't gone to the police, or why I'd waited so long. She just said, you stay as long as you need. And I did. In the weeks that followed, I began school again. Quietly, slowly. A fresh start. I didn't talk much, didn't trust easily. But the girls in the class were kind. One of them, Camille, asked if I wanted to sit with her at lunch. I didn't say much at first, but she didn't mind. She talked enough for both of us, and over time, her chatter became comforting. Margaret taught me to sew, just like Mama had started to. Her hands were gentle but precise. She showed me how to press seams, thread needles, measure fabric. A good seamstress, she said, doesn't just mend clothes. She mends pieces of herself. I worked after school with her, learning more each day. It was in those quiet hours of stitching and folding and cutting that the shaking inside me began to slow. But healing isn't a straight road. One afternoon, I was walking home from school when I passed a man who wore a hat like my father's. My heart stopped. I couldn't breathe. I ducked into a store and waited there for 30 minutes, even though I knew it wasn't him. That night, I had nightmares again. The kind where I was back in my old room, where the air was thick with silence and fear. I woke up screaming. Margaret came running. She held me like I was still little. "You're safe," she whispered over and over. "You're safe now." One morning, a letter came. It was from Miss Clara. She wrote, "Ellie, I wanted you to know I've been thinking of you. The town's quiet. Your father's asking questions. But I've told folks you went to stay with family, and nobody's saying otherwise. If he comes around again, I'll send word. But you stay where you are. Be safe. Be free." I read that letter 5 times. Folded it neatly and placed it next to Mama's. But there was something else that needed doing. Margaret had an old radio that played local stations. One day I asked if I could write a message and have it read on air. She looked at me, curious, but didn't say no. I wrote, "To anyone who knew Evelyn Johnson from Cedar Cove, her daughter wants you to know, she was kind. She was strong. She loved fiercely. And her memory is safe." They read it one Sunday morning. A short message in between weather reports and church announcements. But it felt like shouting from a mountaintop. A few days later, we got a letter. From Mrs. Beatrice. She'd heard the broadcast. She wrote, "Eleanor Mae, I always suspected something was wrong in that house. I'm sorry I didn't speak up more. Your mama loved you something fierce. Don't you ever forget that." The chain had begun. One voice sparked another. One truth pulled up another truth long buried. I started keeping a journal, just like Mama. Writing helped me untangle the thoughts. Some entries were short. Had a bad dream again. Woke up crying. Others were long stories about Mama, about the day we made jam together or the way she'd hum while brushing my hair. Each word on the page was another stitch in the quilt of my heart. One day Camille asked me, "Why don't you smile more?" I didn't know how to answer. Then she added, "When you do smile, it's like the sun came out." That stuck with me. Bit by bit, the smile came back. First like a flicker. Then like a sunrise. One afternoon, Margaret brought out a small cedar box. "I think you should have this," she said. Inside were photographs. Of Mama as a teenager, smiling with friends. Of her wedding day, young, nervous, in a handmade dress. A picture of me as a baby, Mama holding me, looking down with eyes full of something I hadn't seen in years. Peace. I cried over that box for hours. Not just for what I had lost, but for what I had regained. A truth no one could take. By the time I turned 16, I had learned to live again. Not just survive, but live. The fear that used to follow me like a shadow had begun to fade. Not gone completely, no, but smaller, like something kept behind glass. Margaret's house became a real home to me. We planted flowers in the front yard. Marigolds, Mama's favorite. I started sewing small pieces on my own, little coin purses, pillow covers, simple dresses. Folks from church started asking for things. Before long, I was taking orders and making a few dollars here and there. Margaret said, "You're turning your pain into something beautiful." And I think she was right. Camille and I stayed close. She helped me laugh again. She was the first person I ever told the whole truth to, about Daddy, about the nights, about the lies. I thought she might look at me different. But she didn't. She just hugged me tight and said, "You didn't deserve any of that. None of it." And that's when I knew, love isn't always family. Sometimes it's the friends who show up when you're breaking. When I was 17, I met Nathan. He worked at the feed store on Vine Street, tall and quiet with hands like they'd built everything he touched. At first, I avoided his eyes. I didn't trust softness coming from a man. But he never pushed. He just offered small kindnesses, a glass of water on a hot day, a fresh apple from the back shelf, a smile that didn't ask for anything. We'd talk by the porch sometimes after church. About books. About family. About God. He asked me once, "Do you believe in second chances?" And I said, "I believe in surviving." He said, "Sometimes that is the second chance." It took me a long time to let myself love him. But he waited. Not with pressure, just patience. By 18, we were spending our Sundays walking along the river, talking about what kind of life we wanted. He said he dreamed of owning a small piece of land. I said I dreamed of having a quiet place where I could sew and teach girls who had been through what I had. He didn't blink. He just nodded and said, "We can build that together." We married the next spring. In a little chapel just outside Macon. Margaret cried through the whole ceremony. Camille was my maid of honor. I made my dress with Margaret's help. White lace sleeves, soft cotton bodice, and stitched inside the hem, Mama's fabric scrap, the same one I had carried from Cedar Cove. I kept it with me all those years. Nathan held my hands at the altar and promised not just love, but safety. Not just a home, but peace. That day, standing there with him, I felt like my mother was watching. Like the wind that moved through the chapel windows was carrying her voice. "You are not what happened to you, Eleanor Mae." I could hear her whisper. "You are what you choose to become." And I had chosen love. We settled on a little stretch of land outside Forsyth. Nathan built the house with his own hands. I set up my sewing space in the back, just like I dreamed. In time, girls began coming to me. Young women who had run, who had escaped, who needed quiet and soft fabric and someone to remind them they were still whole. I taught them how to mend seams and how to mend their hearts. The years passed. We had 2 children, Calvin and Lydia. I told them stories about my mama, about Margaret and Camille and Miss Clara. I waited until they were old enough to hear the truth before telling them everything. Not just the hurt, but the healing. Not just the pain, but the redemption. Nathan passed away when I was 68. Peacefully, in his sleep. The kind of death he deserved. I miss him every day. But when I sit on my porch and the wind rustles the pine trees, I feel him near. Just like I feel Mama when I open her letters. Just like I feel Margaret when I walk past the hydrangeas we planted together. Now, at 72, my hands are slower. My stitches not as straight. But I still sew. I still write. I still speak. And that's why I recorded this. Because someone, somewhere, needs to know that pain does not define you. That even if your own father said cruel things, especially then, you are not those lies. You are not unwanted. You are not to blame. You are not broken beyond repair. You are a survivor. And you have a story. I was once a girl who believed I was unworthy of love because that's what I was told. Now I am a woman who knows better. I'm a grandmother now. 6 grandbabies and counting. They sit at my feet and ask me to tell them stories, and sometimes I do. I leave out the darkest parts. I give them magic and laughter and the warmth my mother once gave me. I build memories in my boxes, each one marked with dates and notes and treasures only I understand. And you, my dear one watching this now, maybe you need to hear what I'm about to say. If someone has hurt you, if someone has lied to you, if someone made you feel like you weren't worthy, they were wrong. You deserve safety. You deserve love. You deserve a life of your own choosing. And if you're still in that dark place, I promise, there is a way out. Talk to someone. Tell the truth. Write it down. Hide it in a box until you're ready to read it. But never forget, you are not alone. And if my story helped you, if something in these words sparked something in your heart, please, from the bottom of mine, I ask you to subscribe to this channel. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that freedom is possible. Leave a comment below with the word rebirth, so I know you watched until the end, and that the message reached you. Every subscription is one more voice rising up against silence. One more story breaking chains. You never know. Your share could be the lifeline someone was waiting for. Don't wait. Don't wonder. Do it now. Let your voice join mine. Because even after all I went through, I found my peace. I built my life. And I believe with all my heart that you can too. May God bless you. May you feel seen. And may you never forget. It's never too late to be free.